So now the more interesting question, what can we actually do about it? What will I do if I suffer from performance anxiety? How can I approach it? First of all, to see it from an angle of positive psychology and not so much thinking in terms of psychopathology, which sometimes makes people feel a bit funny as if there's something really, really wrong with them. Positive psychology, just to break that down for you quickly, means you're focusing on the strength, the weaknesses, and you're not focusing on mental health issues as such and class them as a pathology, but you're basically building on the person's strengths. You accept feelings as what they are. They're fleeting, they happen, and they go again. So you basically need to focus a bit more on being in the moment, let's call it that, which helps to achieve the oft quoted flow in performance. So it would be ideal to approach it from that angle, but that can sometimes not be enough, and there's no shame in that at all. And I'd like people to stop feeling like, if I consider some sort of therapy, I'm totally flawed and there's something so wrong with me that people will judge me in any way. We need to get rid of that stigma. So basically, if we're staying with that slightly, positive psychology angle for a second, low to moderate levels of anxiety, or let's better call it nervous arousal in that case, they actually enhance performance. They're good for you. They're good because you care and you want to do well. So don't ever think, performance anxiety is always unhelpful. It gets to a level, and that's what the word anxiety, I think, induces and makes most people think about, is when it gets over this level where we're still sort of in the low to moderate region, essentially. But that's the Yerkes-Dodson law. It's called, so basically nervous arousal is good. Having nerves is good. It is performance enhancing. That is not the same as the oft-propagated no intervention, or the recent trends we see in some coaching communities to bash therapy and therapeutic work on performance with anxiety, and to say all therapists do it wrong and they all have the wrong angle, and this is the way to do it. Because that's what I want to tell you straight away. There is not one solution to combat or work with performance anxiety. That depends so much on how it manifests for you in your particular case. So never trust anyone who says, I found the way to combat performance anxiety and everyone else is wrong. And that's always a warning sign. To basically be able to evaluate what you would need to do, you have to know the person, a bit of background history, how exactly they react in a performance situation. If it's more of a somatic thing that's going on, so if it's jittery and trembling and dry mouth and all of that stuff, or if it's just in their heads and they feel really distressed, but it doesn't show so much physically in a way. And one isn't particularly easier to deal with than the others, to say that straight away. So you can pull off a really great performance and literally die inside. So that doesn't mean anything. But it would probably help to think, that nervous arousal as such is not a negative trait. Yes, but also to acknowledge that therapy, some sort of intervention, can sometimes be necessary, and there's no shame in it. And it somewhat irks me a tiny bit if in certain parts of the coaching community state anxiety is compared to trait anxiety. State anxiety being the anxiety that we all feel when something triggers our fight or flight response, even in a performance situation. Just some people feel it stronger and others feel it not quite so strongly. That's the anxiety that comes and goes. trait anxiety is different. So it's not the same. High levels of trait anxiety and high levels of performance anxiety that feel crippling to the performer can sometimes need intervention. And to say they don't, or you can work on them with just acknowledging, positive thoughts will be enough, or you are enough, whatever, that might actually lay that someone gets help. And that's never a good thing. So it would be good if we could stop bashing the therapeutic approach, if you know what I mean. There's horses for courses, and what's good or not so good for you depends on you and your individual case. But that just as an aside. So as I already said, a certain level of arousal or anxiety, low-level anxiety, is actually good for your performance. The problem is in people with trait anxiety or higher levels with anxiety, there's basically three sort of sources of stress that sort of affect these people differently than they affect people who don't suffer from anxiety of whatever kind, be it more specific or generalized. That is basically the personality characteristics, so that you're more someone who is prone to trait anxiety or suffers from some sort of anxiety, be it social, be it general, or be it whatever else, some sort of phobia maybe even, or a panic disorder as well, that goes without saying. Then it's the situational stress, so basically your performance. And then it's the task mastery. And you can't do so much about the former two. If you're going into a situation that you have no control over because the way you have to perform is set, and also because you know you're maybe have a more anxious disposition by nature, you can of course work on that. But these things can't be changed so quickly. And what you can do, though, is you can be well prepared. You can master your instruments. You can eliminate the potential for mistakes as best you can. That's not the same as over-practicing, which is a totally different problem. So really just engage in what we call task mastery. And there is research there, for instance, Wilson and Rowland wrote about that, I think in 2002 or 2004, can't remember, that engaging in task mastery and having a high level of that brings anxiety and performance anxiety in musicians down significantly. That doesn't mean that you're rid of it for all times, but that's something that you can influence. So be well prepared, be in control of your instrument or whatever you're doing. So that's one coping strategy. Then, and that's something that we sort of adapt from sports psychology, think about eliminating both distraction, that's the one thing, because if you focus on the jitters, you're already distracted. You're not in the moment. That's definitely the case. The more you try to fight it, the more likely it's gonna happen. Then it's also a question of giving this anxious feeling a tiny bit more weight than it actually deserves, if that makes any sense. So if you think you need a certain routine, for instance, or so, that's the same thing. So that might actually distract you from just going into a state of flow. And when you have so many things in your mind that actually make the whole situation special and out of the ordinary, when in fact it should just feel natural and normal. So that's what we're aiming for. So distraction and what we call explicit monitoring, the same, or not the same thing, but they affect you in that way as that they impair performance because they take your focus away. So distraction, essentially worrying about stuff, thinking about things that don't belong into the performance situation. And monitoring also because it takes you away from the skill that you practiced, and that's probably in your muscle memory. And if you then go like, oh yeah, I really need to focus on the technique now again, and what am I supposed to do with my hand here, or what is my larynx doing there, and so on. That is what we call monitoring, and that takes you out of the state of flow. And in fact, one of you sent me a question about this, and I basically read that out to you. When we are playing or singing, sometimes we don't think, but we just do it. There's a free flow. But sometimes our minds can't stop and we think constantly, and that flow is interrupted. How can we shut down our brains when this happens? And the answer to that is you can't, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't hold on to these thoughts. And that's the exact problem. As soon as you start making an effort to control your thoughts, you're into this realm of distraction and monitoring what you're doing. Distraction, if it's thoughts, more so than monitoring. Monitoring we often refer to when we are focusing a lot on technique instead of just communicating and just letting it flow freely, essentially. So you're distracted in that moment. If you notice these thoughts are creeping in, you do what some people do in mindfulness techniques. You just let them come in and you let them pass. You're not holding on to them and you're not trying to control them, which is easier said than done, but it can be learned. But to break it down, it is really that simple and hard at the same time. Don't try to shut down the brain. Don't try to shut down thoughts. Take them as what they are, acknowledge them, and let them pass. That's it. So don't give them more weight than they deserve in the moment. They're just thoughts. They don't determine what you're doing in the moment or how you're going to perform. So these are just very basic tips about mindset and what can we do and what distracts us and what takes us out of the moment. Then there's, of course, therapeutic intervention, which a lot of people shy away from. But I would encourage everyone who feels they're really crippled by their performance anxiety to talk to someone, to their GP, to a psychologist, to a therapist, to a counselor. It doesn't matter. There are people out there who will listen, and they won't diminish what you're feeling, and they have an open ear. So you're not a failure or a bad person because you acknowledge you can't cope with it by yourself, okay? If we're talking about therapy, there's behavioral therapy. One of them is focusing on the more somatic side of things. For instance, if you're very tense when you're stressed, you will maybe look into something akin to, progressive muscle relaxation, for instance. So that can help. That is a more or less behavioral therapy, even if a lot of people don't perceive it as such. And that's often combined with desensitizing the person, so basically gradually starting to build up more resilience. The anxiety-inducing situation will be tried out on a very low level. So if the 5,000 people listening to you scare you, you're not going to do that straight away. You're maybe going to start with performing in front of your boyfriend or something. Or maybe just recording yourself and then watching back. So that's something that is very specific to the individual case, how exactly people would look into that. But we're talking literally about graded steps to re-educate you. So you're essentially getting to that stage where you can do what you want to do again. So, and that's a behavioral approach. And then we have the cognitive therapy, which is more concerned with changing thinking patterns that cause these maladaptive behaviors, as we call them. So why are you avoiding the situation, for instance? So essentially we're trying to restructure what is going on in your mind, essentially. It's a process where the negative thoughts and this catastrophizing, this catastrophic thinking gets reframed.